The chair's coming up on stage, which means it's time for one of our chats. So we've got an impressive lineup. We're talking decarbonisation next on at the stage. Of course, it's an ongoing theme throughout the event this year. So headline, Decarbonisation Technology, a time for industrial innovation. And we're led by Tribeca Asia Infrastructure Fund's Susanta Mazumba. Now, if I had my TV show here, we're doing an innovation show, as I said to you, down in Australia. We've just started filming it for the Nine Network. I would love to have them here to listen to this. In fact, there's a number of our people who've been on stage over the last few days I would love to get and capture and put on camera, because there are some great ideas pushing us towards a better future. Hello, sir. Fantastic to see you again. I'm going to let you, don't throw those very expensive microphones around. We like to recycle, because that also stops with our footprint there. So, Susanta, I'll let you introduce the panel, and we've got until 6 o'clock, and really looking forward to it. If you have any questions, I will be walking around with a microphone, so if we finish in time, I'll open it up to the floor. Thanks, team.
Hello. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much. This is the last agenda for the day, so really special thanks to all your time and attention. Decarbonization is probably the most challenging human endeavor since the discovery of fossil fuel hydrocarbon almost 150 years back. But at the same time, decarbonization is probably the most important step to clean our environment, and this is very important part. And energy transition and decarbonization both actually go hands in hand. Generally, their mining industry contributes 4 to 7% of the carbon emission, which on a relative basis probably not as large as transportation or the power industry, but still on a standalone basis this is a pretty significant. And there are aspects like economic aspects, political aspects, and the technological aspects of decarbonization. Here we are focusing on the technology aspects, and we have got a very distinguished speakers with a deep hands-on knowledge of the industry. Let me introduce to Ms. Shibom Palikia. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. She's the manager for ESG Australasia at RPM Global. She has been in the mining industry for 18 years and focused on technology, ESG consulting, planning, and assessment. Then we have got Mr. Cameron Sharp, mining account manager for Caterpillar Australia. At Caterpillar, he was involved in decarbonization initiatives, hybrid power solutions, and electric fleets related infrastructure. We have got Mr. Henry Sanderson. He actually made a presentation on Tuesday morning. He's the author of Voltras, Winner and Losers, Race to Green, which was voted one of the best science and environmental books of 2022 by the Times. Thank you. Probably I will start with Ms. Shibom to ask you the first question. How are the things are changing in the mining industry and the companies to decarbonize all the way to the project planning stage?
So I will just start by saying that I feel like quite a rare species amongst this crowd, being neither a geologist or an engineer, but rather an environmental scientist, and even worse, a consultant. So I have been flying the green flag of sustainability in the mining industry for a long time. And I suppose it's really been a pleasure to watch this profound shift in how ESG and in particular decarbonisation criteria has been incorporated at a very early stage of project planning. In the last 4 years, I would say the biggest shift I've seen is companies uptaking decarbonisation criteria and inputting it into their scoping studies and pre-feasibility studies in a way that's really materially impacting on project descriptions and the project design. So whether it's looking at the different options available through the processing phase or fleet movements, and I'll leave fleet electrification to Cameron because it's his area of expertise. We're really seeing a much more granular approach in every component of decarbonisation that does occur through a mining operation, all the way from construction through to closure. The other aspect that I really see emerging, and I think we've seen some good examples of it, is decarbonisation as a concept really influencing a company's decision on where they invest, the deposit they invest in, and the technology they're applying. And probably one of the best examples, and we've heard about it this week, is the emergence of deep geothermal lithium brine deposits in Europe and North America, and the application of direct lithium extraction technology, and that drive towards putting decarbonisation at the forefront of that decision making at the very conceptual stage of deciding where to put your investment.
Thank you. Mr. Sharp, Caterpillar has many large pool of customers offering very innovative solutions. You are on the forefront of that. Within decarbonization technology, what makes you most excited about that?
Well, I'm fortunate to work with Caterpillar and involved in some of these new technologies which are being deployed, allowing our key clients to meet a lot of their goals that have been set. With an engineering background, it's nice to be part of these new technologies. There's a lot of problems that you encounter, so finding solutions to said problems, is is great from my perspective. I got involved in hybrid power systems in 2014, and at that stage there was no hybrid power systems in mining in Australia. I was presenting to mining companies and independent power producers, and often just about getting laughed out of the room as some kind of tree-hugging hippie. And now 10 years on, we don't see many power systems getting built that aren't hybrid in one way, shape or form, adopting renewables, energy storage, and reducing the run hours of the gensets, and of course the fossil fuel used. Now I'm a modest man, so I'm not going to claim all responsibility for all the change in the uptake of hybrid power systems, but now I'm involved in these battery electric trucks. It's just nice to play a part in the rollout of these new technologies, and it's good to see the momentum that can be gathered by some of these new tech. It involves a transformational change in mining. It's easy enough to plan for these electric vehicles and all the reticulation of electric power and the charging infrastructure for a greenfields mine, but it's often difficult when you're looking at adopting these technologies in the existing mine. From an electric power perspective, of course, it requires the adoption of considerably more power to be able to keep these vehicles operational, and the running of power to the bottom of surface mining pits and underground mines is problematic. It's difficult to make some of these requirements fit with existing legislation, mining rules, and the country in question's electrical safety rules. So it involves quite a lot of augmentation of existing rules to be able to adopt some of these new technologies. It's often like trying to put a round peg in a square hole, quite often.
I completely agree. I think mining equipment, trucks, etc., are probably the most difficult to electrify, unlike cars and small stuff. So we have actually more questions for you later on. No, thank you. Mr. Sanderson, you had a great, fascinating presentation yesterday morning. Maybe you can share some of your thoughts and some of key insights from your book, Voltras, for all of us.
Yeah, thank you. So I think what I wrote a lot about in my book is the sort of existing supply chain for battery minerals, and a lot of that goes through China, which relies on coal-fired power. And I think what we're seeing now is this desire to have a manufacturing renaissance in the West is accompanied with a desire to clean up some of these processes. And I think one of the advantages of, starting with a blank slate is, are there ways we can compete with China by innovations that help to lower the cost and improve the sustainability of processing and manufacturing batteries. So I covered a bit of it in the book, but I think that's really key now going forward. We've had a lot of innovation on battery chemistries, on cathode chemistries, but now I think innovation on the manufacturing side and on the processing side. And if we start out building processing in the West, are there steps that we can cut out through innovation that can reduce the carbon footprint and reduce the capex, and that can help us have a cost advantage potentially over the Chinese systems, and that's all about also about decarbonizing all of the materials, you know, steel and aluminium, copper, etc. And I think we're seeing, you know, this week U.S. government committed $6 billion for industrial decarbonization technologies. So we're seeing that push very much going on. So that's how I see things going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Probably I will have a second question with you, Ms. Siobhan. Is what are the key challenges for the mining industry to decarbonize? And again, it's an open-ended question, but please feel free.
Yeah. Well, where do we start? I think, you know, I mean, I come from Western Australia, so I'll put my Western Australian cap on for this one. And I think the first one is remoteness. So we tend to love going exploring for commodities in the middle of nowhere. You know, that's where they are. And, you know, I don't know if anyone from Chalice is in the room, but good on you for finding one just down the road out of a fairly established city. So the remoteness means that historically and even currently diesel power supply or gas, if it was available, was really the most practical and economic option. You know, if we're really going to move away from fossil fuel use, we have to start considering these off-grid systems. And really for your typical junior miner who's trying to get a project up and running, you know, it's cost prohibitive and unreliable. So I would say that's probably one of the initial challenges that certainly we face in the WA environment. The second one I would probably say is capacity. So if you take a region like the Pilbara, where in the next 10 years you are going to have so many mines coming online, and that if you're going to tap into the existing power grid, then the pressure on those suppliers, those existing suppliers, to actually provide a green source of electricity is going to require just the most rapid and advanced development of renewable systems. So, you know, I am a quasi-greenie, but I do think that there's a place for the debate around nuclear power due to remoteness and capacity.
Thank you. Mr. Sharp, again, going back to her point that your electrification of mining machinery, trucks, etc., is going to be one of the key important points to address the mining industry challenge for carbon emissions. And you have been pioneered with that, and you are working with big companies which call like early learner clients. Could you share about your experience and how that initiative is going on?
Well, in relation to trying to get some of these new technology to fit with existing rules, it's tough. You know, a solar farm or a battery system operating in a utility type application is entirely different to operating on a mine site. You know, you look at live work, which is inherent with working on battery systems, arc flash, segregation of componentry. You know, when you look at a PV inverter or a battery inverter, generally they've got lots of different equipment inside a box with lots of different voltages and relays and breakers. This doesn't fit the bill on mine sites. You know, it all needs to be segregated into Form 3 and 4 boards for certain mining clients. So trying to get these technologies to fit with existing rules is tough. And then when you start looking at the electrification of vehicles, which is still in its infancy, you know, we're just at the trial stage at present. And as you mentioned, we will be deploying vehicles with some of our larger clients, the early learners, which is all publicly available information. There's BHP, Rio Tinto, Newmont, Tech Resources, Freeport-McMoRan, and Nova Mondi Graphite. So these are clients that we're going to be deploying battery electric vehicles with, and it's initially one vehicle for trials, and you know, they're going to be going into cold climates, hot climates, wet climates, soft underfoot. And these vehicles are going to be, you know, charging while they're moving. So they're going to be, you know, much like a tram or an electric train. They'll be charging for periods of the incline from the bottom of the pit, and then producing regenerative loads when they're traveling back down to the bottom of the pit through the braking of the electric wheel motors. So yeah, lots of interesting technologies. You know, you really need to think about the land required for all the deployment of green energy as well, which is why I mentioned it's probably easier to be looking at it in the planning stages. You know, you also look at some of these new technologies and there's not as much brand recognition as there probably is in some existing tech. So you see kind of lower quality products sometimes getting put into these applications and they probably won't stand the test of time. But it's a learning curve, and you know, it's all in its infancy at this point. But it's just interesting to see the momentum of these technologies when they do catch hold. Yeah.
Sure. No, I agree. You are, and you have been the pioneer in this industry. Mr. Sanderson, changing the track a little bit, we talk a lot on the supply side, but a little bit on the demand side. And yesterday morning in your presentation, you showed like a different set of cars. So SUV, big car need big batteries, and which always have their challenges. Whereas if you go for a smaller car, the adoption of battery EV can be much faster. Could you talk about a little bit more on the demand side management and how that can go along with the supply side and can have faster decarbonization of our society?
Yes, so you know, that's one of the big questions of, if you think about China, they've already you know, conquered the mass market cheap EV, costing $11,000 or so. I think the big challenge now for the West is getting to that mass market stage and getting consumers to accept smaller cars, smaller batteries, because this will have a huge impact on raw material demand. So that's also about building the infrastructure, charging infrastructure to accommodate, to make people feel that range anxiety is not a big issue. And then also that unlocks new technologies such as sodium ion, you know, that potentially could be more sustainable in terms of raw materials. So in a sodium ion battery, you know, you can often just have iron, manganese, materials like this. You can use aluminium at both ends. So you don't need the copper. So you know, that kind of application could be opened by having smaller batteries, and markets like India obviously could be a big one for that. Yeah, so I think that's really an open question. Will have huge impact on raw material demand, and also getting consumers aware of how they can use their batteries in their cars, such as you know, giving power back to the grid and actually receiving some compensation for that as well, which will further incentivize that shift.
Understood. Thank you. That's very helpful. Going back to Siobhan, could you talk about a little bit of what kind of role the regulators and the government is playing, and what kind of pressure they are putting directly and indirectly on the many of the industry players to accelerate decarbonization process?
Yeah, so I think you know, the pressure is coming from really all over the place, and whether it be legislation, stakeholder expectations, lender expectations, we're just seeing a profound shift in terms of what's driving some of the changes in terms of decarbonisation. So probably I would start with legislation. So there's been rollout of legislation in most developed countries around commitments towards net zero, and typically, but not always, aligned with Paris Agreement. So that there's the sort of foundation. And then you move to more sort of specific requirements, where you're seeing certain jurisdictions require companies to demonstrate their milestone reductions in CO2 emissions with a straight line trajectory to net zero by 2050, but also requiring that to be implemented by 2030. And you know, the challenge there being that until we actually do see the rollout of commercial viable options of electrification in fleets or alternative fuel fleets, and similarly reliable renewable power supply, you know, actually demonstrating those milestone reductions is going to be a challenge. Probably at a market exchange level, you know, we're seeing the requirement for CO2 disclosures. So Singapore Stock Exchange already requires companies to disclose their CO2 emissions, or not all companies, but certainly, and it will expand to all companies. Europe and the UK as well, and you know, Australia also, you know, this year will require that disclosure, and those disclosures will be treated very much like financials in terms of the assurance level required. So when you consider that it is actually going to be out there in the public domain, it will be scrutinised. You're absolutely going to be compared to your peers. You know, when there are limited funds that everyone's after to support their operations, it starts to really drive that decision-making process.
Sure. But at the same time, I think you made a very good point that you need the policy support, you need the technology, and you need a bit of innovation and demand side, and all three need to work together to decarbonize. I think, Mr. Sharp, you talk about some of the issues and challenges. Maybe we can dwell upon a little bit on some of the hybrid solutions you are working on. And again, we know that mining industry is one of the toughest to decarbonize. So maybe you can talk about a little bit of the challenges you are facing.
Yeah, a lot of the challenges come around the electrical safety rules. I mean, of course, safety is paramount, but trying to fit some of these new technologies into the existing rules is extremely hard. It'll also require a real change in skill sets in the mining industry. You know, it's there's a lot of automotive electricians, but that's not what's required for these new technologies. Yeah, I mean, we could see improvements in technology and batteries and the likes, but you know, when you start looking at the reticulation of power for these mine sites, it's challenging. We're doing modelling for clients at the moment, and you know, in some sites you need to, you know, double your power generation. Most likely that's going to have to be through green energy. Trying to get these energy solutions to fit with existing rules is tough, and the reticulation of the power to some of these locations is extremely tough with the current rules, and an augmentation of these rules will be required if these technologies are going to progress.
Because again, you know, mining industry is like a 24/7. It's not like you running on a battery drains out in the midst of mining nowhere, and then you have got others, you know, like diesel generator comes. It's a 24/7 industry. So in that kind of thing, how do you make that hybrid solution successful and ensure that client has a seamless experience, at the same time they make progress in the decarbonization?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of positives to looking at these new technologies. I mean, a battery electric vehicle can potentially be more productive than a diesel machine, because it doesn't require to be stopped and filled with diesel periodically. It can be running all the time. Most likely it's going to be autonomous. You know, autonomy and the applicable MineStar software is going to be quite critical. You know, you need to make sure that these vehicles aren't all charging up at the same time. On an islanded power system, you've got a limited amount of electric power available at any time. And even on a grid-connected site, you know, you don't want to be seeing these huge transients and spikes, because that can affect your tariff moving forward. So communication is going to be critical, you know, knowing what's available from the power source, and having the interoperability between all the different technologies is also critical. So communications is going to be really, is going to have to advance moving forward.
Thank you. Mr. Sanderson, again, going back to your yesterday presentation, you showed a chart where China captures almost 80–90% of the lithium and cathode processing capacity in the world. Again, you are talking about some innovative solutions, so probably you can talk about a little bit more, and in addition to the lithium and cathode, what are the other areas you feel that Western world can have more innovations?
Yeah, so they're very energy-intensive steps involved, and I think graphite and anodes is one of those areas that hasn't been looked at closely enough. And again, when you localize supply chains, you have an opportunity to clean them up and make them more sustainable. And if you're talking sort of making synthetic graphite, at the moment in China, you know, it's sort of heated to 3,000 degrees for 30 days in these open furnaces using coal-fired electricity, so it's not a good situation, right? So I think there are real opportunities to decarbonize graphite and anodes. And that's what we see happening with new innovations, new technologies. But one issue is, yes, you can do that by putting these plants in areas with renewable energy. But I think what we're seeing is increased competition for that renewable energy. For instance, I was recently in Sweden, and there's huge increase projected in power demand because you've got green steel being built there. You've got Northvolt, the big battery producer. You've got other companies. So they all want this hydropower, but there's actually not enough to go around. And the same, we're seeing industry move to Quebec and other areas where there's plentiful renewable energy, but I think the competition for that energy is going to be quite acute. And there was a chart shown earlier in the conference about the power demand from AI and data centers. So we're going to see all this demand coming on that has to be met with renewable supply, or renewable plus nuclear and other supply. And when we look at hydropower, we saw in China a few summers ago that partly because of climate change and these climate impacts, it's going to be also a less reliable source of power potentially. And we've seen a lot of the industry in China shift to the southwest where there is hydropower, but again, they ran into problems when there was droughts and lack of supply. So I think competition for power as we decarbonize these industries is going to be really intense.
Thank you. Again, just to summarize that, we need policy support, we need technology, and we need innovation as well as the demand management. If I have missed out any points, we probably have a couple of minutes before we wrap up. Any points if any of the speaker wants to mention?
Well, I would probably, we haven't spoken about Scope 3 emissions, which I think, is sort of the thing we all avoid because we're not really sure how to deal with it. And particularly in terms of Scope 3 emissions, I think really one of the most critical things there is having sophisticated databases and software solutions that enable you to analyse, the carbon footprint of your supply chain. So look, I think that there will be a shift in time, and whether or not markets decide that we need to be reporting our Scope 3 emissions is the next question. But certainly something that I think we do need technological advances, whether it be through blockchain technology or other emerging technologies in that space. We're going to need that to really truly understand our Scope 3 emissions.
Yeah, I mean, from a Caterpillar perspective, we're embracing a lot of these new decarbonising initiatives. We've been in electric power since 1939 when we produced our first generator set, so we feel we're carrying a pretty good hand into this electrification phase. I mean, coming up with an electric mining truck, it's our battery electric 793, which will be the first we deploy. We've got some underground machines also, but coming up with that solution, yes, it's great, it's fantastic, but it's only half of the puzzle. Having the electrical infrastructure to be able to keep said vehicles charged and productive is, again, a very important part. But it's exciting times, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else? Any last word from your side?
No, I agree on the Scope 3. I mean, as I say, if you're a battery producer, you can use renewable energy to produce batteries, but you have to deal with the carbon footprint of your supply chain and the raw materials. And we heard this week from Nickel Industries, which it was quite interesting to see they're investing in a big solar power plant in Indonesia. So that needs, all of that needs to happen so that the final battery can get to a lower carbon footprint, including the supply chain.
I think that makes the point that energy transition and decarbonization, they go hand in hand. You need the renewable power. At the same time, you need the decarbonization. And it's a long journey. We don't believe it's a 10 years process. Probably it needs a much longer than that. But it's important that we make the first step. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you, audience, again, in the last agenda. So thank you for your time and as well as attention. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, team. Do you reckon we could get a really nice photo of these guys together? Would that be possible from our videographer down the front there? I'd love to get a photo of these guys up on stage with that in front of it. I think that would be really great for Tribeca as well. So if I can ask you to stay there for a moment, I should probably release them, shouldn't I? Would that be a good idea?
Yeah.
So thank you so much, everyone, for staying until the end today and taking the time to hear this really important conversation. We're going to let you go out there now into the foyer. We've got drinks for you. We've got some food. You're welcome to stay for a little while and enjoy one another's company and network. And just keep an eye on your program. There's a full list again there of what's happening tomorrow. We'd love to see you back. So enjoy and be safe on your way home too. Thanks, everyone.